It was a cold and rainy night when Richard, a businessman known for his coldness and pragmatism, decided to do something he had never done before. He had always liked to keep his personal life separate from business, and his routine was impeccable and almost predictable. Richard never paid much attention to the people around him, especially those who worked for him. His focus was on growing the company, accumulating results, and of course, maintaining the status he had built over the years. Richard's social life consisted of business events and strategic dinners, where he carefully calculated every word and gesture. Evelyn had been his housekeeper for a few years. Discreet, efficient, and always punctual, she knew Richard's preferences down to the smallest detail. His penchant for precision, his obsession with organization, his refined taste. Evelyn knew exactly where everything belonged in the house and never dared to change a thing. The two rarely exchanged more than a few cordial words each day. To Richard, Evelyn was just another cog in the machine that kept his world running the way he liked it. But that night, something unexpected happened. Richard had an important business dinner planned to finalize a contract that could elevate his company to the next level. He needed to project an image of stability, someone well-balanced not only in business, but also in his personal life. Perhaps to surprise his clients or to seem less rigid, he suddenly had the idea of inviting Evelyn to accompany him. At first, she was confused. Such an invitation was, to say the least, unusual. Richard was clear and direct. He expected her to be there, but without interfering or drawing attention. "I need you to be discreet, no opinions, just accompany me. And if you need anything, wait for me to handle it," he said, without much ceremony. To him, Evelyn was a convenient resource to build the image he wanted to project, someone trustworthy but with no prominent role. He only hoped she would fulfill this simple request. Evelyn, on the other hand, hesitated but accepted the invitation. She knew Richard was a demanding man, and though the invitation left her intrigued, she couldn't refuse. She dressed as best she could, choosing a simple yet elegant dress, and made sure to follow all his instructions to the letter. However, deep down, Evelyn felt a mix of anxiety and curiosity. After all, what could that impenetrable man expect by inviting her to such an unusual event? When they arrived at the restaurant, Evelyn did exactly as Richard had asked. She remained silent, almost invisible. During the conversation, he conducted the dialogue with cold precision, answering each question and negotiating every detail with a chilling, calculative approach. But as the dinner progressed, the clients at the table started to draw Evelyn into the conversation. They wanted to know more about her, where she was from, what she did, simple questions that placed her in an unexpected position. Richard tried to hide his irritation, but he couldn't stop Evelyn from responding politely. What began with short, formal answers gradually took on a different tone, as Evelyn, little by little, began to open up, talking about her life and work in a way that revealed a strong, authentic personality. Her spontaneity contrasted with Richard's rigidity, and to his surprise, the client seemed far more interested in what she had to say than in the detailed explanations he was offering about the company. Throughout the evening, Evelyn, without realizing it, was winning over the guests with her simple yet genuine stories, while Richard tried hard to regain control of the conversation. He felt uncomfortable not being in command, but something within him was beginning to shift. It was as if he was seeing the scene from a different perspective, observing Evelyn in a way he never had before. The woman he had always considered simply the housekeeper was now shining, standing out effortlessly, and the clients were smiling, appearing more at ease by the moment. By the end of the night, Richard faced an uncomfortable realization. Perhaps, for all these years, he had underestimated Evelyn, and maybe others around him too. He'd always believed he had everything under control, that he alone was responsible for every success. But that night, it became clear that his view of people might have been limited. On the drive home, the silence between them was almost tangible. Richard, who always had words to argue and plan, found himself with nothing to say this time. Evelyn, on the other hand, gazed out the car window, lost in her own thoughts, unaware that this night would mark a turning point in the businessman's life. Could Richard be changing? Evelyn wasn't sure, but something told her that the cold, calculating man she knew was slowly allowing himself to see the world in a different way. And so, by the end of that night, it wasn't just Evelyn who returned home changed. Somehow, Richard, too, was beginning to realize that beneath all his apparent control, there was much more to learn about the people around him. It was a cool, tranquil night, the kind of evening that invites people to gather around a table, sharing not just food, but also ideas. Evelyn, a woman with an intense gaze and a calm demeanor, was seated at the head of the table, surrounded by a select group of powerful investors. The room was softly lit, creating a welcoming ambiance with a touch of sophistication. The dinner, an opportunity for business disguised as a social gathering, was about to take an unexpected turn. As the dishes were served, the conversation drifted through numbers, profits, and strategies. Everyone was focused on the future, seeking new opportunities to expand their companies and increase their wealth. But Evelyn, with her characteristic calm, decided it was time to bring up something that had been on her mind for a long time. She felt this was the perfect moment to share her ideas, something she deeply believed in, something that could change how everyone at the table thought about business. She took a deep breath, raised the glass of wine in her hand, and when everyone turned to her, spoke with firmness and clarity. Of course, profit is important, but we can't forget that behind every number, every investment, there are human beings. There are lives that will be impacted by the decisions we make today. The human aspect and social responsibility cannot be ignored, cannot be set aside in the name of financial growth. Her words landed like a bomb on the table. The investors, who had been absorbed in their own wealth-building strategies, looked at her with almost palpable surprise. They were accustomed to discussing profit margins, percentages, and growth projections, but never the human impact of these decisions. It was a perspective that, to many, seemed too radical, too distant from business pragmatism. But what really shocked everyone was not just the idea itself, but the confidence with which Evelyn presented it. She wasn't asking permission to share her opinion. She was sharing a truth she believed was essential for the future, something she knew, if heard and embraced, could transform how everyone thought about what truly matters in business. The investors were silent for a moment. It was clear that her words had made them think. Some, like Daniel and Laura, exchanged approving glances. They knew Evelyn was more than just a businesswoman. She had a vision, something that went beyond the immediate, and this only deepened their respect for her. But Richard, one of the group's most influential and skeptical investors, was far from pleased with what he'd just heard. He disliked distractions and didn't like being challenged. Richard had always believed that business was all about the numbers, and anything beyond that was simply a waste of time. His expression turned cold, his eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward with a sarcastic smile. "Interesting," he said with sarcasm in his voice. "But do you really think the market cares about these human considerations, when what matters is the financial return? This may sound nice in theory, Evelyn, but in the real world, numbers speak louder." The tension at the table grew. With his sharp tone, Richard tried to discredit her words, steering the conversation back to the familiar territory of profits and figures. But Evelyn remained unfazed. She was there for more than just impressing them with numbers. She was there to show that the future of business didn't have to be built solely on the tangible, but also on the intangible, the impact on people's lives. "I'm not talking about theory, Richard. I'm talking about responsibility. The world is changing. People are becoming more aware of how companies affect their lives and the environment, and now, more than ever, they want to support those making a difference. What good is a business that grows but destroys everything around it? I believe that by putting people at the center of our strategy, we can create stronger, more sustainable companies that truly make a difference. The tension in the air was palpable, but somehow Evelyn knew she had planted a seed. Richard might not agree with her, but there was something in her words that started to resonate. The other investors began to reflect, and the atmosphere of discomfort gradually gave way to a growing admiration for Evelyn's courage. She knew she wasn't going to change Richard's mind that night, but at least she had made everyone stop for a moment to think differently, and that, for her, was already a victory. The night went on, but something had changed. That simple meal, which at first seemed like just another business meeting, had transformed into something deeper. Evelyn hadn't just challenged the status quo, she had made everyone rethink their priorities. The dinner, in some way, had become the beginning of a new conversation, a conversation about the future of business, where humanity and profit could indeed coexist. And although Richard hadn't yet accepted the idea, it was impossible to deny that the seed of change had been planted. Evelyn felt a knot in her stomach as she walked to her office, still shaken by the dinner that had unsettled everyone. The conversation with the investors echoed in her mind, especially the way she had stood firm on her ideas about social responsibility. But, contrary to what she expected, Richard's reaction was not one of respect or acknowledgement. Instead, he seemed irritated, as though he had been challenged, as if she had crossed an invisible line he never expected her to cross. In the days that followed, the tension between them only grew. Richard, always so controlling and self-assured, began looking at Evelyn with a harsher gaze, almost as if she had made a serious mistake. She knew he didn't like to be challenged, but what surprised her was how personally offended he seemed to be by her words. It was a sunny morning when Richard finally asked her for a private meeting. Evelyn entered his office with a clear mind, trying to keep her composure. But as soon as they closed the door, she sensed something was off. Richard was more impatient than ever. He seemed ready to put Evelyn in her place, something he had never done before, as she had always been his ally and one of the company's most trusted employees. But now she felt that he saw her as a threat. "Do you have any idea what you did in that meeting?" Richard asked, his voice low and sharp. "You knew that kind of talk doesn't belong with our investors. That was not the time for a speech on social responsibility. You should have kept quiet." Evelyn, prepared for the confrontation, didn't back down. She knew this moment would be crucial for her career. "I did nothing more than speak about what I believe is essential for the future. If the investors can't see the importance of integrating human values into business, then maybe this isn't the place for me." Richard gave a bitter smile. "You think you're some great visionary, don't you, Evelyn? You think you can change the game with empty words. The real world doesn't work like that. Business is about results. This is not the time to think about humanity. It's time to grow, to make money." His words hit her like a punch. Evelyn felt a tight knot in her throat, but didn't let her emotions take over. She took a deep breath and spoke more firmly. "I'm not here to talk about what's easy, Richard. I'm here to make a difference. And if that means this is no longer my place, then I won't stay." Her words hung heavily in the air. Richard didn't like what he heard. He stood up from his chair, approached her, and his gaze was now cold. "You don't get it, do you? I gave you an opportunity you didn't deserve, and you're throwing it all away for a romantic and useless idea of what's right." The tone in Richard's voice, filled with disdain and anger, made Evelyn feel a surge of revolt, but also a newfound clarity. She knew he was no longer speaking to her as a colleague, but as a pawn in his game. A game where there was no room for humanity, where the only value was money, and she no longer wanted to be a part of it. Evelyn looked into Richard's eyes one last time. There was a mixture of pain and resolve in her gaze. "I won't become what you want me to be. I'm not a pawn on a chessboard, Richard. I have values, and I won't abandon them for a paycheck or a title. Not here. Not with you." With those words, she turned and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, but at the same time she felt a growing lightness. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. When the door clicked shut behind her, the sound felt final. Evelyn knew she was leaving something behind, but she also knew she was moving towards something far greater, something true to her. And so, with an act of courage, Evelyn left her job. It wasn't just a professional decision, it was a life choice. She wasn't willing to sacrifice her principles for the success of a company that didn't value the same things she did. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt she was heading in the right direction. Meanwhile, Richard stood in the room, staring into the empty space, unable to fully grasp what had just happened. To him, Evelyn's ideals were utopian, but maybe, deep down, he knew she was right. The lingering question was, what is the cost of a career without humanity? Evelyn had already found the answer for herself. After leaving Richard's mansion and the world she had known for so many years, Evelyn found herself in a moment of reflection. That step hadn't been easy. She knew that her decision to walk away from a secure, well-paid job where she had devoted so much time wasn't something everyone would understand. But the sense of freedom, of finally staying true to her values, was undeniable. Evelyn felt she had broken free from something that had trapped her, something that made her feel as though her voice would never have a place in a world that valued only profits and numbers. With a renewed mind, she began searching for a new opportunity. Her experience and skills were extensive, and soon she found a company that, at first glance, seemed the opposite of Richard's rigid, unforgiving environment. The new company had a more human-centered approach to business, more in line with Evelyn's ideals. It was growing and planning to expand, but unlike Richard's corporation, it emphasized social responsibility and the positive impact it could have on the communities where it operated. Evelyn was offered a leadership role within this new company. Initially, it wasn't the highest position, but it was a place where she could make a difference, where her ideas and values would be heard. When she walked into that office for the first time, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging. The company culture was transparent, collaborative, and people seemed to genuinely care about each other. Here, she found a new professional home. Here's the translation into US English. Time passed, and Evelyn quickly stood out. Her leadership, combined with her strategic vision, earned her recognition from everyone around her. She was not only a brilliant professional, but also someone who inspired people to work more ethically, to consider the impact of their actions on the world around them. Her principles now aligned with her actions, and this was driving results. The company's numbers started to grow, but more importantly, there was a sense that they were growing the right way, with responsibility and purpose. Then, one day, an unexpected opportunity arose. The company Evelyn worked for began negotiations with Richard's company. Initially, the talks were centered on a possible strategic partnership. However, the negotiations took a turn no one anticipated. After a series of discussions and analyses, Evelyn's new company ended up purchasing a significant stake in Richard's company. It was a bold move, but to Evelyn, it felt like the right thing to do. She knew that if she could influence Richard's decisions in some way, she could gradually shift the culture of his company, not in an aggressive way, but subtly, over time, to create a space where people and their values held as much weight as profit. When Evelyn heard the news, she felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was pleased with her company's success and the new role that was emerging for her. She knew that she would now hold a prominent position, possibly the most significant of her career, as she dealt directly with Richard. On the other hand, there was a sense of quiet vengeance, something she hadn't expected from herself. It wasn't hatred she felt for him, but a certain satisfaction in knowing that in some way she now had a chance to show him what she'd always known, that there was another way to do business, one where humanity also mattered. The shift in dynamics was almost immediate. Now in a position of authority, Evelyn began to influence the company's conversations and directions. Richard, who once had the final say, now found himself facing a new reality, a company that, although still his in many ways, was being transformed by a vision he didn't fully accept, yet was beginning to realize could work. The pressure on him was tangible, and Evelyn's presence in meetings and strategic decisions didn't go unnoticed. At the first meeting after the acquisition, Richard looked at Evelyn with a mixture of disbelief and something that resembled respect. He couldn't deny that she was now in a position of authority, with the power to not only change the direction of the company, but also challenge his own business philosophy. He, who had been so unyielding, now found himself confronted in a way he had never imagined. Evelyn, in turn, remained calm and focused. She knew her role wasn't to defeat Richard, but to make room for the company to be more than just a profit machine. She wanted to prove that it was possible to achieve profit and prosperity without losing sight of human values. For her, this was the ultimate challenge. In the months that followed, Evelyn worked tirelessly to implement changes within the company's structure. She created new social responsibility programs, directing a portion of profits toward projects that would help improve the lives of local communities. She also implemented employee wellness policies, fostering a more balanced and healthy work environment. Although she knew that Richard would never be a fervent advocate of all these changes, she felt she was doing her part, transforming the company from the inside out. As time went on and Evelyn's company thrived, she knew her journey was far from over. She had achieved more than just securing a leadership position. She had proven to herself that her principles could indeed coexist with financial success. More importantly, she had found a way to rewrite the rules of how business could be conducted with a greater sense of humanity and a mindful approach to its impact on the world. With Richard closely watching her every move, Evelyn felt more determined than ever to continue forward, not for revenge, but to create something greater than either of them. Something that perhaps could finally show that the future of business lay with those who believed that by caring for the world, success would naturally follow. Richard had never imagined his life would change so drastically. Until recently, he believed that his way of leading, with firmness, control, and a focus solely on profit, was the formula for success. He had always been the kind of person who saw emotions and human connections as mere distractions in a results-driven world. His employees feared him, his colleagues respected him, but something was missing: true respect and genuine connection. The turning point came when Evelyn arrived. When she joined his company and quickly began to achieve not only results but also admiration from others, something started to unsettle Richard. He, who had been the center of attention for so long, now found himself overshadowed by someone who, unlike him, seemed to understand the true meaning of leadership. Evelyn, with her calm demeanor, her way of listening to people, of leading by example and respect, embodied everything he hadn't realized was lacking in his own leadership style. Evelyn was not just a brilliant executive, she had something more. Something Richard was beginning to see as essential. She knew how to balance the human side with the professional. Richard watched as she treated her team with genuine empathy, making decisions that benefited not only the numbers, but also the people around her. She valued each employee as a person, with ideas and feelings worth hearing. In a world where Richard believed that the final word was his alone, Evelyn showed that true leadership wasn't about having absolute control, but about guiding and inspiring others to reach their best. What impressed Richard most was that, unlike him, Evelyn didn't seek to please investors or yield to external pressures. She seemed to follow her own path, trusting in her convictions and principles without needing to bend to everyone's expectations. Every decision she made, every step she took, reflected a deep understanding that true leadership wasn't based solely on numbers and outcomes, but on creating an environment of trust, respect, and growth. The The truth, which began to hammer in Richard's mind, was that his arrogant leadership had not only pushed people away, but was also destroying his personal life. His marriage, once solid, was slowly disintegrating. The emotional distance between him and his wife grew day by day as he sank deeper into his own ambitions. His friends, if they could even be called that, were people who respected him for what he represented in the business world, but few truly cared about him. The absence of genuine connection was palpable. Richard felt lonely, but he didn't know how to break free from the vicious cycle he had created for himself. All he knew was that when he looked at Evelyn, he saw the type of leadership he had always desired but never knew how to cultivate in himself. The tipping point came during a crucial meeting. As usual, Richard presented his aggressive vision for the company's expansion, disregarding any concerns from his teams about the environmental impact of his decisions. Evelyn, with her calm but firm demeanor, stood up and offered a new perspective. Not only did she suggest a more sustainable approach, but she also presented a concrete plan that balanced growth with social and environmental responsibility. The investors were paying attention, but it was the way she spoke, with confidence and authority, that affected Richard in a way he hadn't expected. He sat in silence for a moment, watching Evelyn, and something in his mind began to shift. He realized that the way he led, so centered on control and power, was causing irreparable damage to his personal and professional life. He saw himself as a successful man, but at the same time, he felt an emptiness that he didn't know how to fill. On the other hand, Evelyn, with her more humane and inclusive vision, seemed not only to achieve results, but also to create a genuine and lasting transformation in everyone around her. Richard began to see that the damage his arrogant leadership had caused wasn't just in the workplace, but in how he interacted with the people in his life. His cold and calculating demeanor not only pushed others away, but also distanced him from himself. He wondered, how did I get here? What am I really seeking? What am I sacrificing in the name of success? He began to realize that he had lost precious things: the trust of those around him, genuine admiration, true friendship, and most painfully, his connection with his family. His children saw him as someone distant, more focused on his ambitions than on the small joys of everyday life. His wife, who once believed in their dream, was drifting farther away. What he had achieved seemed hollow in the face of everything he was losing. Over time, Richard began to seek answers. He found himself paying closer attention to Evelyn's behavior, trying to understand what made her so different. What did she have that he didn't possess? She wasn't just successful, she was also loved and respected. She led with empathy, not fear, and that was what made her leadership so powerful. It began to dawn on Richard that the true power of leadership lay in listening, respecting people, understanding their needs and motivations. He realized that for years he had been so focused on numbers and immediate results that he had forgotten to invest in people. And more than that, he had become a prisoner of his own image of power. Every day, Richard began to ask himself, can I still change? Is it too late? He looked at Evelyn, now in a leadership position, and felt a mix of admiration and regret. He knew she was right, and that her perspective on business was more aligned with the future than his own. But to change, he would need to take the biggest step of all: put aside his pride and arrogance and start seeing people not as resources, but as human beings with immeasurable value. And so, what seemed like a struggle against change ended up becoming the beginning of a transformation Richard never imagined could happen. He knew the road would be long and difficult, but as he looked at Evelyn, he saw a light, a direction that he now knew he needed to follow. True leadership, he began to understand, was not in the power you exert, but in the power you give others to grow alongside you. Richard never imagined that something as simple yet profound as listening to Evelyn could transform his life so radically. When she suggested he get involved in social projects, he was initially reluctant. For him, Businesses and companies had always been about profit and results, and anything that deviated from that seemed irrelevant. Evelyn, with her clear vision and generous heart, knew there was more than just numbers and high-level meetings. She knew that the corporate world could be a force for good if used in the right way. That afternoon, as they walked through the company's garden, Evelyn began to explain how many successful leaders were starting to recognize the impact of their actions on society. Richard, you have the power to make a difference in people's lives. It's not just about how many millions you can make, but how many lives you can touch in a positive way, she said, with a sincerity that left him thoughtful. She spoke with such passion, with such conviction, that he couldn't ignore her words. It wasn't the first time someone had suggested something similar, but it was the first time he had listened with an open heart. Evelyn invited him to visit a social project she supported, a local NGO that offered vocational training courses for young people in socially vulnerable situations. Initially, Richard went with the idea of just making a visit, a public relations obligation. But when he entered that community center, something shifted within him. These children and young people, with eyes shining with hope and determination, were not just numbers. They were people with dreams, with a future that could be transformed by a simple act of support. He watched, fascinated, as Evelyn approached each one of them, how they smiled and felt valued when she listened to them attentively. She wasn't there to impose something, but to understand what each person needed and how she could help. It was genuine leadership, slow, unhurried, without pressure. Unlike his own cold and calculating approach, Evelyn was building real connections, investing in what truly mattered. During the visit, Richard had the opportunity to speak with some of the young people in the program. One of them, Marcos, told him how the computer course offered by the NGO had changed his life. "I was lost, without direction, but now I have a chance, and I know I can do something better for my family," said Marcos, with renewed confidence. Richard couldn't help but feel moved. It was hard not to notice the impact of these actions. He felt small in the face of so much suffering and yet so much strength and resilience. Evelyn, by his side, looked at him with a calm smile, as if she knew exactly what he was feeling. "Do you see what I mean?" she asked, in a soft but deep tone. Richard couldn't respond immediately. He was surprised by himself. He, who had always thought that his position of power and his style of leadership were enough, was now beginning to see that true strength lay in the human impact he could create. In the following weeks, Richard became increasingly involved in the social project. Initially, he only made financial contributions, but soon he started participating actively. He began helping with event organization, bringing his corporate experience to improve the structure of the project. But most importantly, he started realizing how these actions were transforming his own perspective on leadership. He learned that instead of simply commanding from the top down, true leadership was about standing alongside people, helping them reach their potential, and above all, treating everyone with respect and dignity. In a meeting with the other members of the NGO board, Richard did something he would never have done in the past. He suggested that the organization expand its reach, offering more courses and opportunities for young people, and instead of simply making impersonal decisions, he began listening to the community members and the young people themselves, understanding their difficulties and needs up close. Each conversation, each exchange of ideas made him see life from a completely different perspective. He started to understand that to be a true leader, he would need to create something lasting, something that went beyond the walls of his company. His approach to business also began to change. Instead of exclusively prioritizing profits, he started to care more about the impact of his decisions, how they affected the people around him. He remembered Evelyn's words about being a leader with empathy and responsibility, and these ideas began to root deeply in his mind. He understood that when you care about people's well-being, the rewards are far more meaningful. One night, After a charity event organized by the NGO, Richard was sitting in his office, reflecting on everything that had happened in the last few months. He looked at Evelyn, who was by his side, talking with other guests. She seemed so at ease, so natural in her role, while he, until then, still felt a bit out of place. But inside, he knew he was changing. This wasn't the same Richard he used to be. He was beginning to understand, finally, that true leadership wasn't about commanding, but about inspiring, guiding, and caring. It was about helping others grow and become better, just as he was trying to do with himself. Evelyn approached him, and without thinking much, he hugged her. "I knew you'd be able to see it," she said with a sincere smile. Richard smiled back wordlessly, but with immense gratitude. He knew that without her, none of this would have been possible. And more importantly, he knew that he was beginning to walk a path that, though harder, was undoubtedly the most rewarding of all. Richard now understood that true power wasn't in controlling what happened around him, but in being the change he wanted to see in the world. And finally, he was ready to embrace that role with an open heart. Richard never imagined his life could change so much, but everything started to make sense when he began to see Evelyn in a different light. She, who once seemed like just another person in the way of his success, now revealed herself as a key presence in his journey. Evelyn wasn't just a co-worker or a business partner. She was a mentor, a leader he hadn't realized he needed. Things began to change slowly, without Richard even noticing. At first, he saw Evelyn only as someone with a different perspective from his. She spoke about empathy, about understanding the people around you, about acting with social responsibility. Richard, with his mind focused on numbers and goals, felt that her vision was far out of reach. But the more time he spent with her, the more he began to see something he had previously ignored. Evelyn had a quiet strength, a strength that didn't manifest aggressively or authoritatively, but through her actions and the way she treated others. In meetings, Evelyn always made space for everyone to speak, listened attentively, and asked questions that showed a deep concern for the well-being of others. Richard, who was used to leading in an authoritarian way, began to question his own approach. He realized that while he saw the people around him as tools to achieve results, Evelyn saw each one as a unique human being, with their own challenges and needs. That was what made her leadership so different, so respected. One afternoon, after another meeting where Evelyn had shown patience and understanding in dealing with an employee going through personal difficulties, Richard could no longer hide the admiration he felt for her. He approached Evelyn, and unsure of what to say, spoke with sincere emotion. "Evelyn, I don't know how you do it. How you can be so human, you know? So focused on people. I've always been focused on results, on goals. And now I'm starting to see that maybe I've missed something really important along the way." Evelyn smiled gently, as if she already knew what he was feeling. She knew Richard was beginning to understand what she had always tried to teach in a quiet way. She looked him in the eyes and said, "Richard, true leadership isn't about being the strongest or the most imposing. It's about helping others become better, helping them feel valued, helping them grow. When you have empathy, when you understand what really matters to people, you gain something much more powerful than any short-term goal. You gain their trust and respect." Those words deeply affected Richard. He had always believed that leadership was about power and control, but now he clearly saw that Evelyn was building something much more lasting and meaningful. She wasn't concerned with being admired or feared. She wanted to create an environment where people could truly thrive. Over time, Richard began to adopt some of Evelyn's behaviors. He started listening more, caring about the well-being of his team, and being more patient with others' mistakes. He began to realize that a good leader isn't the one who just points the way, but the one who walks alongside people, offering support and showing trust. In an important meeting, when he had the chance to lead a discussion, Richard surprised everyone with his new approach. Instead of imposing his opinion as he used to, he sought to listen to all the ideas, asked thoughtful questions, and showed genuine interest in what others had to say. He knew it was a big step, but he felt more connected with his team than he ever had before. When the meeting ended, his colleagues were more excited and engaged, and Richard realized that their trust in him had grown. He now understood that leading with empathy not only strengthened the team, but also created a true connection. Richard knew he still had a lot to learn. He knew that, in many situations, his impulsiveness and desire to control things still dominated him. But with Evelyn as an example, he was determined to change. More than anything, he wanted to be the kind of leader she was, someone who inspired trust, who wasn't afraid to show vulnerability, who took care of the people around him, and who understood that results were merely a reflection of the positive impact he had on the lives of others. The admiration Richard felt for Evelyn transformed into deep respect. He now saw her as the mentor he had always wanted, but never knew how to identify. Her strength wasn't in domination, but in her ability to connect with people, to listen to them, to understand their needs, and to guide them with patience and wisdom. Richard knew that, to be a true leader, he would need to continue cultivating this empathy, this attentive focus on others. As he watched Evelyn in a conversation with a colleague, Richard reflected on how much she had changed his view of leadership and life. He wanted to be like her, not just as a leader, but as a person, someone capable of positively and genuinely impacting the lives of others. Over the following months, Richard dedicated himself more to learning, striving to be a mentor to his own team, always with the desire to be the best leader he could be, inspired by Evelyn. And with each step, he felt he was getting closer to achieving that goal. He now knew that by looking at people with compassion and respect, he would not only earn their respect, but also something more valuable: the satisfaction of knowing he was truly contributing to the creation of a better world for himself and for everyone around him. As the months went by, the relationship between Richard and Evelyn began to transform from something purely professional into something much deeper. At first, they were just co-workers, each with their own vision and goals. Richard, always focused on business, saw Evelyn as an important collaborator, someone with good ideas, but who still had a lot to learn about the corporate world. On the other hand, Evelyn respected Richard for his ambition and ability to make quick decisions, but she couldn't help but feel that something was missing in his approach, as if he was losing touch with what really mattered. However, as time passed and Richard absorbed Evelyn's more human lessons in leadership, something began to happen. Their conversations stopped being solely about numbers, results, and short-term goals. They started sharing life experiences, opening up about their vulnerabilities and insecurities. Work meetings were no longer formal moments, but discussions where they exchanged ideas in a more sincere and personal way. What had once been a professional relationship of respect evolved into a true friendship built on mutual trust. Over time, Richard realized that he no longer saw Evelyn merely as a work partner. He viewed her differently now. She was no longer just a mentor or a competent colleague. She had become someone he could count on in any situation. He saw in her a quiet strength, a serenity that helped him stay balanced when the pressures of the corporate world made him lose his way. She, in turn, began to notice in Richard someone much more sensitive and attentive than the image of the arrogant leader she had seen in him at first. He was beginning to open up, to show himself as more human and accessible, and that touched her deeply. On a quiet afternoon, after a day full of meetings and important decisions, Richard and Evelyn met for a casual conversation. They were sitting in a cafe near the office, the soft evening light creating a relaxed atmosphere around them. Richard, usually serious and focused, was more relaxed than ever, listening to Evelyn talk about her passions outside of work. She told him about the books she loved to read, the social causes she fought for, the dreams she had for the future. Richard, in turn, opened his heart, something he had never done before with anyone except his family. He talked about the challenges of his childhood, how loneliness had always been his companion, and how he was starting to realize that there was more to life than just achieving the next big professional victory. "You know, Evelyn, I've always lived for the goals, always chased the results, and thought that was enough. But now, I don't know. I think things could be different. You've shown me that maybe we should worry more about what we leave behind than what we achieve," Richard said, his voice filled with sincerity. Evelyn smiled, lightly touching her hand to his in a simple gesture, but one full of meaning. She had always known that behind the tough facade of a successful businessman was a man with an enormous capacity for transformation. She believed he was still at the beginning of his journey, and that the best changes were yet to come. "You're right. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in the chase for more. But in the end, it's the connections we make, the lives we touch, that really stay. Richard, you're starting to understand what's important, and that's what inspires me so much about you." At that moment, something changed inside Richard. He felt as if he had finally found someone who truly understood him, someone who wasn't just by his side for professional reasons, but for who he was, for his essence. Evelyn didn't see him just as the businessman he was, but as the human being he was beginning to become, and that made all the difference. He felt a deep admiration for her, but also something more, a profound connection, a desire to be by her side, not just at work, but in life as well. In the days that followed, they began to see each other more frequently, even if it was for work matters. But the way Richard and Evelyn looked at each other, the way they spoke, had changed. There was something more in the air, a subtle tension, but one filled with feelings they could no longer ignore. They laughed together, shared stories, and helped each other overcome daily challenges. But what was beginning to blossom between them was something more than just a professional partnership. One evening, after yet another exhausting day at work, Richard invited Evelyn to dinner. They were at a cozy restaurant, the dim lighting creating an intimate atmosphere. The soft sound of music in the background complemented the calm environment. Richard looked into Evelyn's eyes, something he rarely did with such intensity, and said, "I know this may seem rushed, but you've become such an important part of my life, Evelyn. Not just at work, but outside of it too. I really started wondering what my life would be like without you by my side." Evelyn, surprised and touched by his words, felt her heart beat faster. She looked at him with a gentle smile, one full of meaning. The connection they had, built over the months, was now clear to both of them. They were no longer just work partners. There was something more, something that connected them on a deeper level, something that could grow even further. "I feel the same way, Richard. You've become much more than I ever imagined. And I believe that together we can build something even greater, something that's meaningful not only for us, but for everyone around us." In the silence that followed, both of them understood what was happening. Their relationship had evolved from a professional collaboration into a true life partnership. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that they both still had much to learn, but they were ready to face whatever came side by side. Not as mere colleagues or business partners, but as something more, something deep, true, and full of possibilities. From that moment on, Richard and Evelyn began to build together not just a professional legacy, but a life story, where respect, trust, and genuine love became the foundation of everything they were about to achieve, both in work and in life. The social project, which initially seemed like a simple experiment, began to gain a scale that no one could have predicted. It all started with a small idea, a suggestion from Evelyn, that the company could do more than just generate profit. It could also transform lives, provide opportunities for those in need, and make a real difference in the communities around them. The idea, initially met with skepticism by many within the company, gradually began to take shape and gain strength. Richard, always focused on numbers and results, had no idea how this would fit into the highly competitive and ruthless world of business. However, after much persistence from Evelyn and the way she guided him with her humanitarian vision, he decided to give the project a chance. The goal was simple but challenging: to use the company's resources to create professional training programs and support initiatives that helped improve the living conditions of people in vulnerable situations. The first step was to choose an underserved community, one that had a significant need for jobs and skills training. Richard's team, initially resistant, saw the social project as just another marketing effort. But as the first actions began to unfold, the transformation became visible. Young people from neighborhoods that had previously lacked access to good job opportunities started learning new skills and, in many cases, began securing jobs. Richard, who had once focused solely on financial growth metrics, now saw something much larger. He was helping to change the future of people who, without that chance, would have been condemned to remain in the same cycle of poverty and despair. Soon, the social project expanded to other areas, other cities, and eventually other regions of the country. With every step they took, Richard felt the impact more and more. He visited the communities, spoke with the people, and heard moving stories of how the initiative was changing their lives. He met a 19-year-old young man who had once barely been able to feed his family, now working with dignity and a good job. He met mothers who could finally send their children to school. People who had long felt invisible now saw a door opening before them. Richard, who had once been so focused on professional success, now realized the real impact of what he was doing. He was no longer just managing a company. He was truly part of something much bigger, something that transcended any financial outcome. He felt proud, but more than that, he felt a sense of purpose. Recognition from the business community also began to emerge. The media started highlighting the transformation of Richard's company, not only for its financial success, but also for how it was positively impacting society. Mentions in specialized publications, awards for social responsibility, and the growing admiration from other entrepreneurs were just the tip of the iceberg. But the most important thing wasn't the external recognition. It was the sense of satisfaction and fulfillment Richard now felt every night when he went to sleep. He was helping create a better future for so many people, something he never imagined could be possible. However, the greatest reflection of this change was in Richard himself. He became a different kind of leader, more empathetic, more present, more willing to listen and support. He realized that people didn't work just for money or success, but for a sense of belonging and contribution. He now knew that a company solely focused on profit could be successful, but a company that positively impacted the people around it had immeasurable transformative power. He understood that his work wasn't just about being the best in the market, but about building something lasting and meaningful. Evelyn, with her calm yet firm demeanor, was always by his side, supporting him every step of the way. She guided him with wisdom, and he respected her even more for being the person who helped him find this purpose. They became a true team, not just at work, but in their personal lives as well. Evelyn, who had believed in the project from the beginning, saw her vision being realized, and what started as a simple idea was now becoming a legacy. The social project, which had once been a small dream, was now a movement reaching thousands of lives. Richard felt fulfilled. He had found something he never expected to find in his career, a purpose. A purpose that wasn't measured by profits or sales targets, but by the lives he and his company were touching and changing forever. The company, which had once been known for its coldness and relentless pursuit of profits, was now seen as a model of social responsibility and human impact. Richard looked at everything he had accomplished and felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for his company, but for having had the chance to make a difference. Now, when he entered a meeting, his gaze was no longer fixed solely on numbers. He looked at the people, thought of the families being helped, the lives being transformed. Richard had finally understood that true success wasn't measured by the growth of a graph, but by the smile of someone whose life had been touched by his work. Evelyn, by his side, knew that they had both taken the biggest step in their journeys, finding purpose in what they did. Together, they were not only building a successful company, but also creating a legacy that would certainly last far longer than any profit could ever provide. Richard and Evelyn's story took an unexpected but profound turn when they began to intertwine their lives irreversibly, both personally and professionally. What began as a simple partnership at work soon became something much grander, a union based on mutual respect, shared values, and above all, a commitment to transforming the world around them. In the months that followed, Richard and Evelyn began to support each other, not only in business decisions, but also in more personal matters. Both had gone through their own journeys of self-discovery and challenges, but now they were together, realizing that instead of competing, they could complement each other in a unique way. What once seemed impossible, uniting two people so different, with such distinct life stories and work approaches, now felt like the most natural thing in the world. Together they formed an unstoppable force. Evelyn, with her humanitarian vision and empathy, was the compass that guided the company's decisions towards social impact, while Richard, now more balanced and with a more human-centered leadership vision, knew how to turn these ideas into concrete actions. Every meeting, every decision they made together reflected this new purpose. They were leading the company in a way they had never imagined before. But now it seemed like the only true way to do what they loved, creating a positive impact. At first, people within the company were cautious. Some still saw Richard as the cold, calculating leader he had been, while others questioned whether Evelyn's approach could truly be implemented effectively. But as time passed and results began to show, trust grew. The shift in leadership style and company culture not only brought financial benefits, but also fostered a sense of pride for everyone involved. Teams were more motivated, projects were more successful, and the company earned the community's respect for its ethical and responsible approach. Richard and Evelyn's personal lives also evolved in parallel. They began to realize that together, they formed a duo that not only shared the same work, but also supported each other through difficult times. On weekends, while others rested, they found themselves discussing new ideas for the social project or planning how they could take the transformation even further. They laughed together, dreamed together, and most importantly, inspired each other to be better people, both in their careers and in their personal lives. There was something special about the way they saw each other now. They weren't just in love, they were also deeply admired by one another. Richard, who had once doubted Evelyn's more empathetic approach, now saw her as a constant source of inspiration. He admired her quiet strength, her ability to see the good in people, and above all, her determination to make a difference. Evelyn, on the other hand, recognized in Richard a new courage, a courage to be vulnerable, to open himself to new ideas, and to lead with his heart, unafraid of failure or being misunderstood. In their most intimate conversations, they discussed not only their professional dreams, but also the legacy they wanted to build. Both wanted to leave something that went beyond fame or financial success. They wanted to be remembered for their actions, for everything they had done to improve people's lives and make the world a better place. They knew that the true power of their actions wasn't in what the company could generate in terms of profit, but in the impact they could have on the community and the people around them. The months passed, and Richard and Evelyn began to make bolder, more ambitious plans. They were ready to expand their social projects, reach more people, increase the scope of their actions, and, in some way, make the world fairer and more equal. And that shared vision was what brought them even closer. They were in tune, as if they knew exactly what the other was thinking without needing to say a word. The future looked bright for them, not because they had reached the top of their business, but because they were building something lasting, something that would live far beyond their leadership. Soon, they began being invited to speak at conferences about purpose-driven leadership and social impact. Richard, once so focused on the competitive side of the market, was now seen as an example of transformation. Evelyn, in turn, remained the force that brought balance and compassion to leadership. They became a role model for many other companies, and the respect they had earned was tangible. And when the conversation turned to the future, they saw themselves not just as work partners, but as life companions. They dreamed of the legacy they would leave for future generations, both in the company and in the world. The idea of passing on this philosophy of leadership to others, of sharing everything they had learned, became more and more important. They didn't just want to own a successful company. They wanted to be mentors, guides for those seeking more than material success. Their relationship was evolving not just in the professional realm, but in their personal lives as well. They knew that together they were stronger, more capable of facing any challenge life threw their way. It was no longer about Richard or Evelyn, but about what they could achieve together. Their love, their partnership, and their shared vision became the foundation of everything they had accomplished and the cornerstone for everything they were yet to achieve. Now there were no more doubts. Richard and Evelyn weren't just building a company, they were building a legacy. And together, they were unbeatable.